Good morning. What a privilege to be here with Chris and Ann and other Liberty leaders. And I'm so excited, Bill, about what you're doing here, because when I was in the Ohio House, there was no rating system for state legislators, and that would have been very helpful to me, actually. And I think helpful to the legislature in general, because it actually is the job of the citizens to bring, as Ronald Reagan said, bring the heat so that they will see the light. And that's what this kind of rating system can do. So my job this morning in 5 minutes is to say something about how we can win. And when I say we can win, of course I mean Republicans can win, but I mean how can conservatives win? I am frustrated often, as some members of the legislature here today will attest to, often when it seems to be that it's the Democratic wing of the Republican Party which is setting the agenda. And in order to prevent that from happening, we have to use the kinds of tools that the Liberty Caucus has suggested to actually bring that heat so they can see that light. But we are winning, in fact, and we're winning with the public. We've seen just in the past few weeks, the last election, some rather amazing results. And we saw down in Texas that no, the people actually did not want to change the way that the bathroom should be labeled so that any man could go to a woman's bathroom. And people were shocked at that, at least on the left and in the media. And we saw right here in Ohio that the wisdom of the Ohio voters said, no, we don't want to legalize another intoxicant, marijuana, and we're going to turn that down. And then finally, we saw in Kentucky a new governor who actually ran against Common Core and against Obamacare, and is a strong Christian conservative, and got elected overwhelmingly. What in the world is happening? And what is happening is that we're winning these arguments when we articulate these arguments. And that's where the dilemma is. We have to be willing to articulate the arguments. You know, when Ronald Reagan had his overwhelming presidential elections, they used to talk about the three-legged stool of conservatism that put him into office. And that stool still exists. And it begins with the security conservatives. And when we talk about security, and we saw this in the presidential debate recently, a lot of discussion about we have to increase the size of the military, put more money in the military, and certainly most Republicans and conservatives would agree with that. But it's not simply the military, it's also our borders. And we see how Donald Trump and others make a lot of hay. We need to have an articulate argument as to why it's important economically, as well as for security purposes, in order to actually secure our borders. It was interesting to see the French president immediately upon this horrible attack in Paris close the borders. And we need to close our borders, and we need to draw those security conservatives into the Republican Party to help us win. But we need the economic conservatives. How many of us don't constantly talk to anyone that will listen about the $20 trillion in debt, deficit spending, and the unfunded mandates that some say are over $100 trillion? How are we going to overcome them? Well, there are plenty of economic conservatives waiting over there at the Democratic Party for some Republican leader to actually articulate that problem in such a way that brings them to the Republican side. Ann talked about the candidate that says, well, I'm trying to do everything for that 20% in the middle. Well, you know, I don't think it's a good idea for Republicans to try to manipulate or deceive the 20% in the middle, to somehow push our conservative values in the background in order to persuade, perhaps for one election cycle, some voter in the middle to come over. No, I think we should actually articulate conservative values that bring those conservative Democrats, those that actually agree with our values, but fail to hear them well spoken, and bring them to the Republican side of the ballot, and have the kinds of victories that Ronald Reagan had, or that Bevin just had in Kentucky. And that means we have to also include the social conservatives. How many of us have been to events or spoken to people and say, well, you know, It's okay to talk about the balanced budget problems, or it's okay to talk about it, but don't talk about those social values. Don't talk about marriage. Don't talk about life. If we don't articulate those values, we leave a significant portion of the Republican Party base and the conservatives in this country behind. And we cannot win elections without them. And those three legs of that stool, the security conservatives, the economic conservatives, the social conservatives, are essential. But today we are actually in a better position than Ronald Reagan was, because today we have the liberty conservatives. It was only 9 or 10 years ago that the first tax and alcohol writing days were held. The first Tea Parties came out, the 9/12 groups erupted, and now here in Ohio, the Ohio Republican Liberty Caucus. These liberty groups represent a fourth stool, a fourth leg of that stool, if you will, a fourth foundation on which Republican conservative victories can be built. And those are the liberty of the conservatives. And I love what Chris said, but they've had enough already. Leave us alone already. That group that says, listen, we actually have to follow the Constitution. We actually have to prevent an out-of-control president, and yes, an out-of-control Supreme Court. And we can only do that if we follow the guide of our Constitution and our Declaration. And those liberty conservatives, they're concerned about their guns. They're concerned about their religious liberty. They're concerned about how their children are going to have an education that's crammed down from the federal education department called Common Core. Those liberty conservatives create such an added value to a well-articulated conservative candidate. Believe it or not, I remember the Ronald Reagan campaign. When I was young, I said Ronald Reagan, I should have said Barry Goldwater. I remember that too. And so my family was always involved in politics one way or another. And I used to say, my parents had 9 children, I used to say we didn't have dinner plates at our place that we had lecterns, because we were always debating politics. And so I've been thinking about these issues for a long time, even though I'm fairly new to politics. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again from my own party is, well, he's not our guy, but he's the least of two evils. We have to just accept the fact, well, the best we could do was the John McCain or the Mitt Romney. It's the best we could do. It's better than the other guy or the other guy. It's the lesser of two evils. I've been hearing that for 40 years. You know what happens when for 40 years you vote for the lesser of two evils? You accumulate an awful lot of evil. The Republican Party and the conservatives in this state and this country have to begin to stand for what is good and not simply what is the lesser of two evils. And if we draw in those conservatives, those 4 different types of conservatives, we not only will have the Republican Party and Republican Party base, but we will have those conservative Democrats that are waiting to hear that from a candidate, and we will win elections overwhelmingly. And that's my goal, and that's my advice to the Ohio Public Council. So thanks so much for having me.